best of my knowledge, my grandfather and grandmother started to this country on a boat from Sweden. Uh, they were kind of recruited by Bishop Hill because Grandpa was a skilled barrel maker, which was a big deal back in those days. And unfortunately, he got pneumonia and died on the way over. So my grandmother hit New York City and went through the process there. I forget the name of that building. That's everybody went through something island, but anyway, she went through that. She was quite pregnant and had one small child. The one she was quite pregnant with was my father. He was barely born in this country, so citizenship was established there at least. The people at Bishop Hill were very honorable to my grandmother. They let her come and stay there, even though obviously she wasn't the barrel maker they wanted, but fortunately she could make lace and she could do tatting. And it was Bishop Hill at the time was a self-supported commune. Everybody had to work and everybody had to have a skill, and they had communal meals in a big dining hall, and some of the places were, most of them at the time I guess, were kind of like dorms, with each family might have a separate room, and they would get together for their meals and activities and things in a big communal room in the dorm. But like I said, everybody had to work. It was basically a farming community. So most of the guys worked out in the fields with horses and things like that. And the women, of course, did all kinds of cooking and cleaning and food processing and food preserving and any other skills that they could have that could bring in money, like quilt making and lace making and those kind of things. Long before my relatives got there, they arrived, it was pushing winter, and they ended up living in caves along the river for the first winter, and that was terrible. A high percentage of them got pneumonia and died, and so starting out, the commune had a tough time getting going, but they were pretty much a going concern by the time my relatives got there. My grandmother did end up remarrying, and when she did, they moved out of the Bishop Hill commune. The guy had a farm of his own, and he was kind of a tough old Swede too. His name was actually Carlson, so my family name at this point should technically be Carlson, not Stromquist, but around Bishop Hill and the small towns around there, it was pretty much a Swedish community. So there were many, many Carlsons. And Grandpa had a tough time getting his mail. He'd keep getting them mixed up. So he suddenly decided, I'm going to be Stromquist, and nobody argued with him. He was Stromquist. That was it. That's where that name came in. So just one of the little things that kind of happened back in those days. But anyway, my dad grew up around the little towns of Oneida and Altona and Galva, which were all little Swedish communities at the time. And he got to be quite a football player. And he ended up going to college in Lido, which at the time was William and Vashti College. It was mainly business oriented, but it was a college. And they had quite a football team in their day. Back then, most of the big schools, they were just like fraternity clubs that had football teams. So one of Dad's proudest achievements was they beat Notre Dame. And that was something that he never quite let people forget, Of course, that would be totally impossible in this day and age, but back then it happened. They were playing basically a fraternity clubs team. After he got out of there, he was playing for sort of the semi-pro town teams in football around there, and went into the Army towards the end of World War One, and mainly played football there for camp teams. Came out and played semi-pro until he was about 40, and he was a tough Swede too. One of the things that could only happen back in the day, when he was wanting to ask my mother to marry him to get her engagement ring, he played 3 games of football in one weekend, like on a Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday afternoon, for 3 different teams under 3 different names. But he had a pretty good arm. He was actually a quarterback, and until he was 60, he could pretty much knock you down with a football. But he could speak Swedish, and his personal Bible was written in Swedish. But he had been that kid in school the first few years that sat in the back of the room and talked funny, and got teased about that to the point where I was not allowed to learn Swedish. And he would enforce that vigorously with the rest of the family. So that cut off a lot of the Swedish tradition for me right there. There's one old family Bible somewhere that my mother put a few entries in, but she really didn't know the Swedish history or what town they came from in Sweden or anything like that. I wish I had been able to spend more time with my aunts and pick their brains, so to speak, because they were much more into it and knew much more about it. Unfortunately, they're gone now, and I'll never know.